Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the developments with the Nick Daicos foot issue, along with previous injuries that were managed by and dealt with Tom Mitchell and, of course, Braden Maynard last year, I thought it might be wise to bring someone on who actually knows what they're talking about. And I've somehow managed to coax a highly regarded physio into the podcast / interview today to talk about some of these ongoing issues that Collingwood are dealing with. And on the other side of me, we've got Attila, who operates out of the Sports Clinic of Melbourne in Prahran and also does a bit of freelancing with some sprint coaching. So, Attila, welcome, mate.
It's good to be here, mate. How are you?
Good, thank you. Do you want to maybe shed some light before we get into the thick of things? We're probably just going to talk about the fundamentals of what plantar fasciitis is, as these are what the players are dealing with, and then from there we'll get into the stages that some of the players are in. But Attila, what is your experience when it comes to the AFL field and athletes? You just want to shed some light to the fans watching us.
Yes. I've been working as a physio for nearly 15 years, mostly in the sports space. I've done a fair bit of, mostly footy is the sport I've primarily been involved in. I've done a little bit of rugby, a little bit of athletics as well, but footy's been the main one, most recently up at the Dogs, which was a bit of fun. But so I've seen a lot of it. I've seen a lot of it firsthand. A lot of these boys struggling with these sorts of issues, and I've definitely seen some get out alive and some who have really struggled through. So I've seen the full spectrum, and it's given me a lot of really good insights.
Yeah. And I failed to mention, guys, it's nice to speak to Attila. Although it's still about injuries, it's nice to talk about other people's injuries and not mine, because I've spent too much time on your tables, mate, over the years. I'll tell you that much.
Hopefully not too much time. Otherwise, I'm not doing a very good job. But yes.
That's right. Not too much time, guys. He does really well, guys. So if you want to go see him, he's in Prahran. But we mentioned running coaching as well. Maybe I didn't speak about this before we got into the interview, but with plantar fasciitis, we'll talk about the foundations, and maybe you can talk about running mechanics as well and how that might play a role or something. I'm not too sure if there's anything there, but tell us about plantar fasciitis, Attila.
Yeah, sure, mate. So I suppose the plantar fascia as a structure, it's basically it's a bit of tissue that lines the sole of the foot. It joins between your heel, so the bottom of the heel, basically onto the forefoot. It's sort of like a fan structure that sort of goes across. And its main function, I suppose, is it tightens up when you're walking or when you're running, and it gives you a bit of push across. And so particularly when you're running fast and you're trying to be efficient, it's taking a lot of tension and it's helping you to actually propel you forward, which is pretty cool. And so it's a pretty crucial structure. Plantar fasciitis, the medical world's a little bit divided on exactly what it is, and that's probably why we struggle sometimes to deal with it. But whether it's the actual plantar fascia itself, so that tissue starts to degenerate and degrade, or whether it's the bit where it attaches onto the bone just before that starts to be overloaded, one of those structures is affected. But regardless, you'd say that it's a failure to absorb the training load, so they're not able to handle what they're doing. And there's probably biomechanical reasons for that. It's probably genetic factors for that. And there's a few other bits and pieces as well. So I suppose that's probably what we're going to be unpacking today.
Yeah. And how common, with your experience in Aussie rules, how common is it to see in these type of athletes? Is there a predisposition to it?
It definitely used to be a lot less common, I swear. And I think back to when I was at uni, and it used to be sort of a middle-aged, overweight male sort of idea. And it's definitely not that anymore. And so obviously something's changed, or probably a few things have changed, because definitely now, I'd say in the last 3-4 years in particular, a lot of the footy guys seem to be getting it. I do wonder if there's some footwear stuff that's involved. There's definitely potential for that. I wonder if it's the training loads. Footy's obviously a lot faster, and the guys are running a lot further at reasonable click now as well. So there's probably a few little bits and pieces. But in the last couple of years, it's definitely seems to have skyrocketed.
Yeah. I mean, you see all the fancy boots that are coming out these days, and maybe there's not a lot of care for the support wear. Not many people wearing Asics that much these days is what I've noticed. So maybe something there. But yeah. Nicky D, Attila. Nicky. Oh, sorry. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Oh no. I was just going to say, I think particularly with the shoes, the carbon fiber plate, like that's a thing now, right? Since I want to say it was sort of just before Tokyo Olympics, maybe that started to become a thing. And it's definitely a lot more common. And I reckon footwear wise, especially if the guys are doing a lot of their off-season running in those, or maybe preparing for 2K time trials and trying to get really fast, because they're definitely helpful to run fast. There definitely seems to be something going on there. So I wonder if that's one thing to watch out for.
Okay, interesting. And most recently, the latest victim, we'll say, is Nick Daicos to fall to the early stages of plantar fasciitis. So we're not going to press you and say, ask you when we want him back, when can he be back? That's not what we're asking for. But maybe what does early stage of plantar fasciitis look like, generally speaking? And what we do know about Nick Daicos is he's reduced to stationary bike work and just stationary drills, just kicking off one step effectively.
Yeah, so I mean, which makes perfect sense. I suppose as a condition, if you think about it in stages, what you need to do, you need to calm it down first. And I suppose he's lucky enough now that it's preseason. It's still relatively early preseason, so he can afford to do that. And so the management strategy evidently is, well, let's pull him off legs. Let's get him off his feet so he's not running. He still do some fitness work, obviously, on the bike. But if he's not running, the plantar fascia actually gets a chance to settle down, which is pretty handy. And if you've got the time to do that, which they do now, it's really handy. And I dare say if this came up in, I don't know, round 18 and you guys are looking for a finals campaign, maybe this management strategy might be a little bit different. So it's kind of fortuitous in that way. So they'll probably calm him down, let's say, for a couple of weeks. Keep his fitness up on the bike, in the pool, that sort of thing, cross-training, etc. Then look to rebuild him over a couple of weeks. It sort of depends on exactly how bad it is as well. If it was something he was dealing with for a couple of months and maybe didn't tell anyone, or maybe the club hasn't told anyone, then that calm down period might be a bit elongated. And I mean, I don't have any inside information. I don't know if you do, but I don't know any of that stuff. But generally, if it's just happened and he hasn't had any symptoms before, you'd expect couple of weeks offload to settle it down. If his fitness was good, just a couple of weeks to reload his fitness back up, and then he should be well and truly right by round one. But I suppose we'll wait and see.
What's a little bit concerning, and I don't want to be fear-mongering or anything, but Darcy Moore, the skipper of the Pies, he came out the other day and he said, he is sort of just managing it throughout Christmas or just before Christmas, and then they had the Christmas break. So maybe if I want to make an assumption, I'd say he probably did very little on legs conditioning during that time, and he's come back and he's still managing his way through. So I guess it's a wait and see. Like I said, we're not here to instill fear into anyone, but it's just a matter of wait and see. And like you said, just keep the drills really simple, and if need be, do the conditioning off legs, because he's built that base from pre-Christmas anyways. Yeah,
that would be an assumption. I suppose let's just say if he was sore through the Christmas break and he didn't do anything, that would be kind of that's a bit worrying, to be honest, because then he wouldn't have done any running for 3 weeks. And you would definitely, like, bike is good and swimming's good. It's much better than nothing, but it's not running. It's definitely not the same. And if you're thinking about we want to build the load up in the plantar fascia and in other structures as well, you need to run to do that. So if he's had 3 weeks off completely and now he's going to take another week or two off, you're like, well, that's actually ages. So that's kind of concerning. And he would lose fitness and conditioning and the rest of it. But I mean, who knows what he did during that break? For all we know, he might have done everything and he was fine. And then it was just first training back, he was sore or something similar. There's a few question marks, and it's hard to be definitive while they're there.
Of course. So someone who probably went further down the chronic stages of plantar fasciitis was Tom Mitchell last year. And I'm not sure. Do you know who Tom Mitchell is, Attila? Are you familiar with him?
I know Tom Mitchell. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend we're best mates, but yes.
I forget that you've been within, I guess, the AFL realm. So yeah, with Tom Mitchell, spent quite some time away from the game. He ended up having his plantar fascia removed. So before we get to maybe what the purpose of removing the plantar fascia is and how you can even actually do that, it just boggles my mind how you can remove a piece of connective tissue and still be fine. But the question before that is, during the season, what are some intervention measures, in the sense that would have he gotten cortisones or anything like that? Does that apply to that area?
Well, you can try anything that you want, really. I suppose before you try cortisone, so plantar fasciitis as a typical process doesn't usually have too much inflammation. So a lot of conditions are purely inflammatory. You give them cortisone, they feel amazing. Plantar fasciitis sometimes gets a little better, but rarely feels incredible. So you could try that. Like, that might have been tried, I'm not sure. But that's definitely something that is often used. Otherwise, all your normal stuff, like you try and offload him during the week as best you can, but obviously he's going to lose fitness over time. Ice, settling things down, getting you in the pool, all those sorts of things can be helpful. But realistically, and that's why it's so hard in the middle of the season, is because you need to settle it, and time off is kind of required to do that. So you can baby it through, and Sometimes you get away with that, and sometimes your player's good enough. That's probably more of a question for the medical staff to have with the coach in these sorts of situations where, okay, right now he's playing at, I don't know, 80%. Is that good enough to be selected? If it is, we'll keep going at that percent. But if he's slipping to the bottom of the list and maybe he's not going to get selected, or we need him to do more, that's when you make that call and say, okay, cool, we'll try something drastic. We're going to offload him, or we're going to do surgery. I think in the case of that, I don't think they've removed his plantar fascia as such. I saw that he had surgery on it. I think what they usually do is they just give it a little snip. So if you think about it like an elastic tissue, so if it's nice and tight, you cut the edge and then it's a bit longer, right? So if you're saying that the plantar fascia is being pulled too much, you snip it a bit and then it's not being pulled so much anymore because it's longer than it was before. So you release some of the tension in there, and that can help. So that definitely is one way to do it. I suppose the story from my childhood, back in, I don't want to say it was the late 90s or maybe early 2000s, was about Robert Harvey. Yeah. I don't know if you know, have you heard this story or not?
I've heard of Robert Harvey, but I haven't heard the story. Enlighten me.
So he had chronic plantar fasciitis, and the story back in the cowboy days of sports medicine was that he maybe had a couple of drinks and then was jumping off the coffee table trying to snap it himself. As opposed to getting surgery for it, and that was the way you could do it, because then you didn't have a surgical wound or anything. So we've been cutting / snapping plantar fascia for a while now, and sometimes it can really work by just taking tension out. The flip side of that, because I said before the plantar fascia is an important structure for running, right? Now you've actually got less mechanical assistance, I suppose, when you're running. So the plantar fascia as a structure is not really propelling you forward so much anymore. So typically you'll be a little bit less explosive. So there's a trade-off. That's why we don't just cut everyone's, right? And we generally wait until we really have to. So there's a trade-off to it. In the right person who's really struggling to get up, it definitely can be helpful.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, because so he had that operation and then he actually had a bout of appendicitis, had his appendix removed as well. So he's been through it, poor old Tom Mitchell. But in the off season, he got through his whatever he needed to do, then came back to training. I usually go to training once a week. I try to, and he was fully immersed into the program there and wasn't really missing any drills. And then we probably found out 3, maybe 4 weeks ago that now he actually has some sort of second metatarsal issue. Now, whether it's on one side or the other, I'm not too sure. But you mentioned the fact that the connective tissue is not the same after you pull one of the pieces of. You're the expert here, but is there some sort of compensation there? Is that what you're sort of alluding to as well, potentially?
Oh, you know what? It could be, and I don't know what his return was like, and I don't know if he was running exactly the way he was post from a loading perspective. I think sometimes it can be a bit sore. Obviously, there's things that have been cut and there's a wound, etc. And then you're going to have a limp at least for a while, and sometimes that can still sort of be there for a bit longer than it should, even when you're not in pain. Sometimes people still move like they are, and I don't know. That definitely could be his case, and you could see how that would alter his running and his landing and things like that. As far as the plantar fascia being cut, I don't know if that's going to. I wouldn't think it would necessarily change the force that's going through the bones. But the one thing that you would definitely look to is you'd say, well, bones generally they adapt to exercise when you load them appropriately. And if someone's getting a bone stress injury, they haven't been prepared for what you've asked them to do. So maybe he was really feeling good at the start of when preseason started back. And he obviously had a crack, and you said he was moving well, but perhaps his bones weren't quite ready for that yet. And so he hadn't established the adaptations because he had so much time off in between his plantar fascia surgery, appendicitis, and then off season. There's definitely room for deloading and then underloading the bone, which definitely can predispose you to getting something like that.
Okay. I'm going to assume, and you can correct me, but the difference in age between Tom Mitchell will be around your age. What are you, 30? What are you, 33, 34, 35 these days? Where are you sitting these days?
You're lowballing it, mate, but I'll take that.
Is there much of a difference in recovery between a Nick Daicos and a Tom Mitchell when it comes to what's the word? I forget the word, but not malleability, but just the ability to regenerate and come back from these type of injuries. Is there a difference between the two, or genetics, or what are you saying?
There definitely is, mate. There definitely is. As you get older, you recover slower, and that's a fact of life. As I'm sure you're starting to notice. Not quite there yet, but you'll get there. You definitely don't recover like you do when you're 20 or 21. Once you post 30, there's lots of genetic hormonal reasons for that. So you look at that and say, well, that's just part of it, really. Is sometimes you add a week or two for being an older athlete, and there's not too much you can really do about it.
That's right. You've been through your fair share of hammies, so you would know, huh?
Yes, I know exactly what that's like.
Sorry, mate. All right, I got two more questions for you. So, plantar fascia, the symptoms itself. So, when somebody presents to you with plantar fascia, because I've never experienced, and I'm not sure if you've experienced, but you would know with the clients you've dealt with. What do they come with you and say? They say, is it tight, sharp pain? What are the sensations they're feeling?
Yeah, it's characterized by heel pain. It's pain under the heel, and it's usually worse in the morning. Like they're the two things that everyone will say, which is fine. Typically, I suppose when they actually come see you about it, it's been going on for a little while and it's probably getting worse. Because I think it starts kind of insidiously. It's not like a broken bone or something that just sort of happens. It's usually, I'm a bit sore. That's not too bad. I don't really mind that. And then a week later, I'm actually a bit more sore now. And then 2 weeks later, I actually can't run anymore. It sort of typically builds up. And so I suppose most people won't really get it looked at until they've actually had their activities that they've had to change. And I suppose that's often the same at footy. Once often you get through things. And like, obviously you've played your fair share of footy, that you don't play 100% a lot. And there's things you can play with, there's things you can't play with. And usually once you can't play with it anymore, that's when it really starts to become a concern.
Yeah, bit of a downhill spiral from there. Lastly, is there enough, from your experience, is there enough of an emphasis on running mechanics? Now, I know there's S&Cs in there and they're taking them through their run-throughs at the beginning of the drill. I see all of that at the start of the session, but is there an emphasis where they bring in running coaches? And I know these guys are long-time athletes, so maybe we just naturally assume, they've been running their whole life, it's fine. Is there an emphasis on that, the mechanics of running, yourself being a sprint coach? So did you want to talk to that a little bit?
I've got a strong bias in this debate because not everyone agrees with me, and that's fine. There's almost no emphasis on running mechanics even at an AFL level from what I have observed and from people I've spoke to. And I want to say, with my biased opinion, that it's not there because most people who are working in that space don't understand it well themselves. I think most strength and conditioning coaches, if I'm being frank, most of them are much more comfortable in the gym than they are on the track. And so they're really good with that stuff. Footy guys, footy coaches, they're really comfortable doing the footy stuff, but they haven't really spent time in a track and field space or something like that. So the running mechanics are generally not there. And so it's often sort of neglected a bit and pushed to the side and say, we can't actually coach that. It's too hard to coach. But as someone who's worked in track for ages, you can. You definitely can. And I've personally seen that with footy athletes. I think it's hard, and sometimes you've got to work out whether the juice is worth the squeeze. If you've got someone who's, I don't know, they're hitting 34 Ks an hour and you'd like to hit 34 and a half, you're like, well, to get that, it's going to be a lot of work, but it probably won't change much of their game. Whereas if you've got someone who's doing repeat hamstrings and they can't get on the pitch and you think it's because they're running, well, like, you have to change it. You don't really have a choice. So my opinion is you definitely can. I think people use a few excuses, but it's not what everyone believes, unfortunately.
100% I agree with you. I feel like in the AFL or maybe in other sports as well, you see cases where it's a lot more intervention than prevention. People don't want to invest in prevention in the sense that, for example, Jordan De Goey has had hip and groin issues for the last 12 months. So what they do just before Christmas, they sent him to Dubai to work on his mechanics and all that sort of stuff. So rather than having to fork out an arm and a leg for that, why aren't they investing in people to teach people basic mechanics? I mean, it's not rocket science running, like relative to learning how to kick the footy and play at a high level. There's a difference, right? And the time for investment wouldn't be as high, right?
Yeah, I think one thing on that which is interesting is that obviously the AFL's got a salary cap and it's also got a soft cap for staff as well. And so all the staff that you want have to fit within that. Whereas I'm going to assume that sending a player to Dubai to see a specialist probably doesn't fall within that. So if you've got some cash, it's actually kind of hard. It can be hard to actually invest in all the staff that you want. You usually find most clubs both, I think, in coaching space, but also in the medical space, will have one or two superstars, and that's all they can afford. So then they fill it up with whoever they can get after that. And that's a reality of salary capping, and we can argue whether that's good or bad. But I think that does restrict what you can do. But it'd be obviously in the case of someone like a De Goey, it'd be great if they had whatever expert to fix that at the club. Obviously, that would be a much better way of doing things than having to fly them off to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
But
yeah. It's one of those things with some of the players as well at AFL level. I think it's harder for players at the moment compared to, say, the NBA, for them to go and find external providers and do the S&C or running elsewhere. I feel like there's constraints around that. Like you see the NBA players, they can freely find a coach to sort of travel with them and do obviously different, again, different, like, I guess, balances in their bank account. But surely there should be more autonomy around what the players can do when it comes to working on their physical ability or whatever it may be. Have you noticed any of that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely different contracts for different players. I know that seeking external care is usually allowed, but it's from contracts I've seen, it's typically allowed, but it's usually frowned upon internally. We don't like that when players are doing things, and I kind of get it in the sense it's nice when everyone around your player knows what's going on. And if you're going and seeing someone no one's ever heard of, we don't know what they're doing, and then you come back to us and we don't really know where you're at. So that definitely can muddy the waters a little bit and make it difficult to give that athlete the best of everything. But definitely from a sprint or a running mechanics world, I've seen quite a few that have invested in external providers. They may or may not be in trouble with their clubs, but that seems to be more of a thing that's becoming prevalent. I suppose the difficulty falls into who does the player choose and why, because we're in this world now where I suppose social media is kind of everything, particularly Instagram. You see something shiny on Instagram, and this guy professes he made his runner do, 36 Ks an hour, and he can do the same for you. And you're, oh, cool. And then he teaches you some bad mechanics. I think that's a pretty common story, like to fall into marketing traps and things. So I would actually like it I would like it if clubs actually invested in finding out some external providers for the players and saying, look, we've actually sussed these guys out. We know what we're talking about, and we think they know what they're talking about. You should use those guys instead of just saying it's off season, just go for your life and hope for the best. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of really, really smart marketing that's done out there, and it's probably leading a few people astray.
That's probably a good safety net to get the people at the club to find the best external providers, rather than, like you said, other people getting cajoled into thinking this person, this S&C is the man because he's attractive on social media, influencer, rather than actually knows what he's doing, right? That's what you said.
And that way you do give the guys some autonomy. You give them some options, which is good. And then if it's people that you've sussed out already, then you know them anyway. So you've got a connection. So what that issue with communication that I said before, that shouldn't be there. Instead of just the players choosing people randomly.
Okay. Yeah. All right, I think that pretty much covers all the questions. You've covered them and some more. But just before I let you go, Attila, obviously, thank you for jumping on. It's good to have somebody who knows what they're talking about, and rather than me rambling on and having stabs in the dark. But most of this demographic here that watches the channel are probably from Melbourne, being a Collingwood fan side, and you get the occasional people from other countries and interstates. But generally speaking, if they are dealing with nagging issues or they want some potential sprint coaching, where could they maybe find you? And I'll put the links in the description as well if you want to tell us.
Yes. So, I work out of the Sports Clinic of Melbourne based in Paran, as you said before. I don't really have much of a social media presence, although I am on LinkedIn. So if you get desperate, you can contact me there. But otherwise, obviously, welcome to come to the clinic. If you can get an appointment, that'd be good. But otherwise, hopefully you don't need me too much.
No. Who do you go for, by the way? We failed to ask that question. Do you even follow a team?
I've followed St Kilda I'm in that tragedy, unfortunately. Don't get me started.
Condolences.
It's hard. It's hard. So anyway, this year we'll see what happens this year.
Great way to end the interview, knowing you're a St Kilda fan. At least they've been able to watch it before we get to that point. So I think we've gotten what we needed.
Haven't turned them off yet. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Attila. Appreciate it, mate. Take care.
No worries. Thanks, mate.